What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Friday, May 25th, 2018. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Starting the Memorial Day weekend holiday. And we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to put you on the air with your comments and questions. And starting right here at the top, almost quite literally, just about an hour ago, we had another major ash eruption from Kilauea crater, and I was looking at the earthquake data, and apparently the crater is just rocking and rolling out there. This ash cloud reached up to 10,000 feet, which I think is the second tallest, because the very first one reached 30,000 feet. This one reached 10,000 feet. The others have been 5,000 feet, 7,000 feet. And because of the trade winds, the ash is blowing off toward the southwest. Now, this volcano has been erupting long enough that the sulfur dioxide, the VOG, despite the trade winds, it's been swirling around and backflowing. And early this week, I thought I was under the weather. And then last night, I was driving Claire down to choir rehearsal, and just looking across the valley at the mountains on the other side, you could just see this brown haze, which we recognize because we used to live in Los Angeles. So I just checked on the city of Honolulu, and yes, we do have high VOG ratings. And people who are sensitive to it. That's why our R's are stinging. That's why I keep choking and coughing and everything. So that's what's going on with that. So Mother Nature is out there displaying that she is still very much the boss. And again, nobody knows when this is going to be over. But looking at that earthquake pattern at Kilauea, the volcanologist may be right. Excuse me. There may still be something big down there. More about the volcano later on in the show, however. That was just breaking news here. As you know, yesterday, the lead story was that Donald Trump just called off the peace summit with North Korea, supposedly because of the harsh rhetoric and anger coming out of North Korea, and also because of the diplomatic faux pas that North Korean diplomats stood up U.S. diplomats in Singapore, which appears to have been more a logistics goof up than a deliberate intent. North Korea said they wanted to keep the talks going. South Korea is saying, please, let's keep the talks going. And so Donald Trump today is saying that, yes, the summit may go ahead on the 12th. And it's quite a reversal from his somewhat arrogant written note canceling the summit, in which he said it was irrelevant that North Korea had initiated these discussions, and it was silly for Kim Jong-un to talk about nuclear issues when the U.S. had so many more powerful nuclear weapons. You know, in other words, my big red button is bigger than your big red button. But Trump is now reversing himself and says the talks could go on. Trump's supporters and defenders are saying, see, North Korea came groveling back to us. That was Trump's strategy all along. I am not sure about that because, again, understanding the Asian mindset a little bit, you don't humiliate them if you expect to get something from them. So I think basically Trump is just listening to his advisors, and his advisors are giving him conflicting information. And I think that's illustrated by this article that came out of Sputnik News, that the U.S. is to impose even more sanctions against North Korea next week, even before the June 12th summit, whether it's on or off. And basically the White House is considering these sanctions. They may go into effect next week. And according to the Wall Street Journal, the National Security Council met yesterday to discuss potential sanctions against Pyongyang, military action, and other ways forward. So it's still a bit of a mess. Interesting article that came out of the original antiwar.com. Is U.S. bellicosity backfiring? and it says U.S. threats to crush Iran and North Korea may yet work, but as of now, Tehran nor Pyongyang seem to be intimidated. And you've got John Bolton out there and Mike Pence out there referring to the Libya model for North Korea. And that, of course, is working against the possibility of any peace, because to North Korea, the Libya model means the overthrow and murder of the leader of the country. In the case of Libya, that was Muammar Gaddafi, after he surrendered his weapons of mass destruction. So, mixed message here. Another article along the same topic out of Zero Hedge. End of the unipolar world looms as New World Order responds to U.S. demands on Iran. What we are seeing in Iran and even now in Europe is this automatic going along with whatever the U.S. says has ended. There's now resistance. There's now pushback. There's now straining at the leash. And, pardon me, Iran's President Hassan Rouhani is basically saying the era when the U.S. will decide for the rest of the world is over. And I think that may be coming true. There are still a lot of other nations that are under the influence of the United States, but they're pivoting away. The U.S. empire is failing. It's collapsing. I think it's one of the best things that could happen for the world right now. We're going to take a shout out to our on-air affiliates who just now rejoining our network, and we're going to take a phone call from Raleigh in Minnesota. Raleigh, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I'm giving you a call about an 18-minute prank phone call that Boris Johnson, who's the UK Foreign Secretary, received. And he used to be the also the mayor of actually the greater city of London as well. He received a phone call who he thought was the newly elected Prime Minister of Armenia, Parasha, and he kind of disclosed a lot of conflict between the UK and Russia itself. But this particular prank callers are particularly famous inside of Russia.
Yes.
Their names are Volvo and Lexus, and they actually called Sir Elton John, of all things, one time, and they pretended that they were Putin, and they were calling to pretend that they're kowtowing to or just talk about LGBT rights inside of Russia, you know, and it totally wasn't them, you know, it was some Russian prank callers, you know.
Yeah.
But, you know, of course, England's going to already say automatically, you know, on a whim that they're automatically Russian intelligence without any evidence presented, you know, whatsoever. But I did find it pretty amusing as well. They discussed the Salisbury poisoning, and they, of course, they pretended to be the Prime Minister of Armenia, and the Prime Minister of Armenia is meeting with Putin and Sochi soon. And they asked Johnson, "I don't want to get poisoned, man," sort of thing. And I know that you know, Putin behaves badly, and but he mispronounced a lot of the words that he said. Instead of behave, he said behave. You know, to really sound like, you know, he's the Armenian Prime Minister.
Yes. No, I have heard of these two pranksters before. And yeah, I'm aware that they put their latest caper involved pretending to be the president of Armenia. So yeah, it's out there. People can web search it. Anything else?
Yeah, they actually said that Jeremy Coleman is Putin's boy, you know, in effect. What they really said was he's being influenced by Putin. You know, Jeremy is, you know. And I thought it was a little bit funny, but, you know, it's not true. It's just a prank call, guys, you know. But, yeah, and they talked about the very expensive poison, you know, that Levenko got, you know, about 11 years ago when supposedly his tea was laced with radioactive poisoning. The
Yes.
true story behind that particular case is, really needs to be written, because I don't know, I can't discern fact from fiction with any of these cases, like Salisbury or the very expensive taste of poison, But supposedly the guy died, you can see pictures of him. He looks saintly. They put makeup on him. He doesn't have a shred of hair on his body.
Yeah.
But he was able to tell the authorities everything that they wanted to know. He used to be part of the FSB, which is the dissolved KGB, and he was supposedly an informant for MI6. And
well, he was killed with polonium-210, and polonium-210 is actually a favored assassination method of Israel because it is such a long, slow, lingering, painful death. It's thought that was the weapon that they used on Yasser Arafat.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. And they also discussed, I think it was Parliament, but don't quote me on that one, saying that the polonium traces don't just go from London to Moscow. They go directly to Vladimir Putin's door. They didn't say it like that. They said it in their English way, but, they're suggesting, literally, basically, Putin was cooking up a batch of sweet tea in his kitchen just to poison, dissidents.
Okay, well, you've already covered that part of the story more than a few times. So, Raleigh, going to let you go. Got a bunch of news to get to today. And, of course, in hour number 3, the lovely Lady Claire. So thank you very much, and we're going to let you go. Getting on back to the news here, and this is in line with the idea that the unipolar world is falling apart. France recognizes Russia's new role in international relations, including in the Middle East. And this is coming directly from President Macron, who is actually in Russia at the moment, mending ties, improving diplomatic ties. And, of course, the Western press is described it as Macron is groveling before Putin to try and put a negative spin on it. But the reality is that over the last several years, Russia and especially Putin have shown themselves to really be trying to keep the wars from escalating. They calmed things down in Syria once before over the chemical weapons issue. They're trying to keep things calmed down in Syria now against a hostile force that's already in there, just bombing and strafing everything that they can find. So the American empire is obviously in decline here. Up in Ukraine, up specifically in the Donetsk People's Republic, Ukrainian soldiers who were captured by Donetsk have admitted that Kiev is thinking about launching an offensive against the Donbass during the upcoming 2018 World Cup held in Russia. Because they figure most people will be watching the World Cup and won't be paying attention to news stories about Ukraine going into the Donbass. But the soldiers were saying they were told that an offensive would begin either on the eve of the presidential election in Russia, when the snow melted and the earth dried up, or during the World Cup. So we'll see what's going to happen there. Another flashpoint. As you know, the so-called international investigation is trying to fan up this whole thing about Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 and again say Russia did it, Russia did it, Russia did it. And in the presentation earlier this week, Russia made a point of mentioning that all of the evidence that was shown was that was produced by the Western countries. And none of the data, especially the radar data provided by Russia, was even considered. They're obviously cherry-picking the data to get to a preordained conclusion. Russia did it, they're the bad guys. But it's very interesting when you look at this organization. The investigation team had that piece of a book missile with a serial number on it, which they said originated from the 53rd Anti-Aircraft Missile Brigade from Kursk in the Russian Federation. And I was saying, well, I don't know how they get from serial number on a piece to that brigade. But the investigation team said it compared dozens of images and came to the conclusion that those unique features point toward a Buk missile system owned by a Russian Army brigade. However, they won't release the pictures. They won't elaborate on what unique features they were talking about. The investigation says it suspects some 100 people were involved in the launch preparation, but have never published the names. Now, the Netherlands Chief Prosecutor Fred Westerbeck, who's heading this thing, says he cannot say who is responsible for this atrocity. Instead, he underscored the investigation is continuing, leaving it for the corporate media to say, oh, it must be Russia. It must be Russia. Now, meanwhile, of course, Russia is saying, no, it was not us. We saw where the missile came from, and it came from Ukraine. And we are not responsible. Meanwhile, their records are showing that the serial number that was put on display by the Dutch investigators actually goes to a very old edition of the Buk missile produced in the Soviet Union all the way back in 1986. Now, the shelf life of these rockets is just 25 years. And after that, they have to be decommissioned and disposed of. And because if you try and launch after that, there's a direct threat to the life of the people launching the rocket. So that's the maximum lifetime of the missile, which means they got this serial number from an old Soviet-era Buk missile provided to Ukraine that had already been scrapped, which means it couldn't have been used to shoot down MH17. But you know the motto of these international investigations: if at first you don't succeed, lie, lie again. Down in Syria, over the last 2 days, multiple attacks by an Israeli warplane over the Lebanese border, firing 2 missiles into Syria, one of which was intercepted. U.S. coalition forces went on in and bombed Syrian army bases, government facilities, oil facilities. Russia stood down. They don't want to give the U.S. an excuse to escalate. Syria showed a moderate amount of restraint, but is complaining over the targeting of non-military assets like the oil facilities. So, again, it's hard to understand what's going on over there, except that you can see who the aggressors are. And I get very angry seeing the media talk about how Israel is defending itself from Syria when Israel attacked first, just an hour after Trump declared he was moving that embassy to Jerusalem. Israel fired missiles into Syria. Syria retaliated. That's who shot first. And let's not forget who invaded Syria and broke off the Golan. The aggressors in all these wars are Israel and the United States. Everybody else is trying to defend themselves. Getting on back to Great Britain, the Skripal case is being memory filed again. They've dragged Yulia out for one very obviously staged interview. Now it's all going to go away. Don't need to think about it. The official story is there. And Sergei Skripal himself has been quietly discharged from the hospital he's been staying at. The BBC says he's walking. He's near complete recovery, just like his daughter. So, to recap the official story, an ex-spy who was retired and strategically irrelevant for years was reportedly poisoned by the Kremlin with Novichok, a scary Russian-sounding word that refers to a group of extremely deadly and fast-acting nerve agents that start shutting down the body's muscles and respiratory system within 30 seconds to 2 minutes, except in the case of the Skripals, where it was several hours with a leisurely stroll, a meal, and beers in between. More about this when we come back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha America, welcome back to the show here, and we're talking about the Skripals case. Both Sergei and Yulia are out of the hospital. They've pretty much fully recovered. They're both walking around. Yulia gave what appears to be a very tightly controlled and staged interview. The British government still will not allow Russian diplomats or family direct conflict rather direct contact to find out if they are being coerced to say certain things or if they're free to travel. Now, in her interview, Yulia said she wants to go back to Russia, but she doesn't seem to be on her way just yet. And it is a serious breach of international protocol. So, I'm going to back up a little bit about the official story as it has come on out from the corporate media, government spokespeople so far, and has now been cut off. They just want it to go away. Had an ex-spy, was retired, strategically irrelevant for years, supposedly poisoned by the Kremlin with Novichok, a scary Russian-sounding word that refers to a group of extremely deadly and fast-acting nerve agents that start shutting your body down within 30 seconds to 2 minutes of exposure. Except in the case of Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia, it was several hours later, with a leisurely stroll, a meal, and beers in between. Then the story was changed. The poison was placed in Yulia Skripal's suitcase. Actually, no, they got that wrong. It was the air vents in their car. Wait, no, that doesn't work either. Maybe it was administered via weaponized miniature drone. No, it was the family's car door handle. Scratch that, it was the front door of the house. Definitely the front door of the house. We're absolutely sure. Either that or Sergei Skripal's favorite Russian cereal. They were given 100 grams of Novichok. No, that's ridiculous. We retract that. That would have killed the entire neighborhood. All right, maybe we have no idea what happened. And by the way, their pets were completely unaffected by the poison, so let's incinerate them. And I can see why this article compares this whole story to something produced by Monty Python. It is that absurd. Now, my favorite theory about what happened has to do with the restaurant where they were eating, which serves not only Italian food, but seafood. And apparently what the Skripals ordered was this sort of seafood melange, and it has a reputation for occasionally being a source of shellfish poisoning, which can be serious and life-threatening. And when it first came on out, the story about the poisoning, it said other people in this restaurant had been affected, and that all went away. So I think it was just dumb luck. They got a bad case of fish poisoning. They were being obviously observed because Sergei's a former spy. And somebody said, hey, we can blame this on Russia. We can use this to demonize Russia. And then the Skripals didn't die. That's a problem. That's why they're being held incommunicado. And the Novichok story didn't make sense. And now, of course, we know that Russia's not the only nation with Novichok. The West has it too, and has had it for a very, very long time. Okay, let's turn to our domestic politics now. There is a lot going on, and over at Zero Hedge again, they've got an article, Decades of Unconstitutional Wars, which is challenging this idea of the Congress literally abandoning its constitutional duty to decide whether we go to war or not and against whom, and simply write the president a carte blanche to say, whatever you want to do, just go ahead and do it. We're in a re-election year, and we don't want to vote on a war, because if we vote in favor of war, that's going to work against us. They want to be able to campaign going into November saying, I'm opposed to the war, but listen, it's the president's choice. The president gets to do this. They are a bunch of cowards, aren't they? But it does open up the door. These concessions of power to the president have a bad habit of never going away. Some of FDR's declarations of emergencies from the 1930s are still in effect today because they enhance the power and authority of the president, and no president likes to give up power and authority. So the issue is that this open-ended authorization for the use of military force is not just going to allow President Trump to start a war with the flick of a button or the snap of his fingers, but anybody who succeeds him into the Oval Office, unless Congress can be convinced to regain their constitutional authority of oversight of wars. Now, over in Israel, they did it. The Knesset actually passed a law to say Netanyahu could start wars all on his own authority. They've already pulled it back. They realized what an insane idea that was. And now Netanyahu needs to have the majority of his cabinet go along with him before he can initiate a war. I still think it would be better if the Knesset was voting on it, but it's their country. They run it their way, even if they do so with atrocities left and right and up and down. Getting on to Gaza, things at the moment are quiet, and it was a tragic situation, there's no question about it. And when we come back from this commercial break, we're going to talk a little bit more about Israel and Gaza, Palestine in general. I'm not hearing the music. There it is. Okay, we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. I'm just watching on Fox News where apparently Trump is slamming Democrats for their criticizing him for canceling the North Korean summit. And Trump is coming back saying, well, it doesn't matter what I do. The Democrats are going to criticize it anyway. It's a Twitter war underway. And frankly, it's also childish. It really is. It's giving the American people and the world a very poor image of what are supposed to be our statesmen and stateswomen. Anyway, back to Israel and Palestine. Norman Finkelstein basically says Gaza is the world's largest concentration camp, and he's saying Israel has just conducted a premeditated full-scale massacre in broad daylight in front of the cameras of the world, once again in Gaza. And he says, no matter what the Palestinians do, they're being shot at. Civilians are being shot, journalists, paramedics. And he says the only way that you're not going to get shot by Israel is to accept life in the world's largest concentration camp. Now ask yourself, would you? If somebody took away your home and put you in a ghetto, that's basically what it is, a ghetto. It's fenced on in. You're crowded in there with 2 million other people. You're living on just bare survival rations because that's all that Israel will allow in. Would you settle for that? Would you accept that? I think the Palestinians have been very, very patient. Now, there is a new piece of spin making the rounds by Israel supporters, and they're going on out and flooding editorial spaces and blogs with this idea that the Palestinians voluntarily left their lands in 1948. And so it's ridiculous for them to be demanding that they get to go back to they voluntarily left. No, they didn't. They were driven out at the point of a rifle. It's ridiculous here. But Israel supporters are saying that severs any prior ownership, the fact that they left the land. Well, if that's true, then we have to look back at the Babylonian captivity. That's where all the Jews in Judea left and were taken to Babylon. And they were there from 598 to 538 BCE. Well, they left. Sauce for the goose, sauce for the gander. But where this story came from is STIT Today or STLT Today, I'm not sure. And it's written by a writer who identifies himself as Jewish. And he says, he's responding to one of these letters saying the Palestinians, voluntarily left their land in 1948. And I want to read you this one quote from the response. The letter's authors purport to be writing for the Jewish community. They have greatly overstated their authority. They write only for the organization on whose behalf they've signed their letter. I confidently say that I am one among many of the Jewish community who, along with the letter writers, abhor the recent casualties in Gaza, but also abhor the provocative move of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem and all other tandem measures taken by the current U.S. and Israeli government to subvert peace and prolong pain in a part of the world that demands more of humankind. So there is a trend. Even though forbidden by the Jewish religion, Jews are speaking up and criticizing their fellow Jews in the Israeli government. That is significant. That is very, very significant. Over in Haifa, as you know, not a lot of attention was paid to what was going on in Haifa because of what was going on in Gaza. but there have been marches over in Haifa that have resulted in clashes with the police and apparently widespread arrests. One human rights worker sustained a broken knee. And it's described as the first reaction of the police to stop the demonstration is to use violence. They don't even come on out. They don't want to talk. It's just immediately attack. And I remember in the 60s, the very early 60s, Vietnam was cranking up, and up in Berkeley, they were just starting to protest and demonstrate. And those protests and demonstrations were very peaceful. You know, the cops would bring coffee, students would bring donuts. That was it. Until Reagan got elected. Then it got much more confrontational, leading eventually to Kent State. Now, the Palestinians are going to seek international protection at the United Nations General Assembly. They're not even going to waste their time going to the Security Council because Nikki Haley's in there going, veto, veto, veto. And while the General Assembly does not have the authority to send United Nations troops anywhere in the world, what they may do is decide it's time for a coalition of General Assembly member nations to put together their own force to basically put along the border and protect Palestine, both Gaza and the West Bank, from further Israeli encroachment. So they're going to try and go for that. Apparently, as far as I know, they're still headed to the International Criminal Court, despite threats by the United States to retaliate against Palestinian diplomats. So what can you do about all this? As you know, Israel's just really angry over boycotts. How dare you not buy our products? Well, boycotting is a recognized form of peaceful, nonviolent protest protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America. Boycotts have been used with tremendous success in the past. When Germany's economy was starting to take off after they got rid of the private central bank, Jewish bankers around the world tried to boycott Germany. So, sauce for the goose, sauce for the gander again. Anyway, here are 9 brands that have ties to Israel's illegal settlements in the West Bank. The first is SodaStream, and that one was brought to light primarily as a secondary effect of Scarlett Johansson's recent adventures in international politics. Jaffa Oranges, Ahava, which is this Dead Sea mineral mud, which thankfully they're not there anymore. But when Claire and I used to go down to our local mall, there were all these little carts in the middle that had all of this stuff on there, and all these, you know, Israelis literally just trying to shove it in our face. And it was so aggressive and uncomfortable. I finally complained to the mall management. I said, this is not a pleasant shopping experience. If I have to come down here and just get jumped on by these people, I'm not coming here at all. And apparently enough people complained where they eventually went away. Golan Heights wine, obvious giveaway in the name there. I was a little surprised about this one, Victoria's Secret. But apparently Victoria's Secret gets its textiles from Delta Galil Industries, a company with a warehouse in the Barkin Industrial Zone and Israeli settlement in the West Bank. It also runs stores in Ma'ale Adunam and Piskat Zev, both in occupied territories. Sabra hummus, of course, obvious. Pretty much everybody understood that. I can't have hummus anyway. It gives me gout. Medjool dates. I feel bad about that one because I do like dates. Eden Springs Water, and another surprise, Hewlett-Packard. And apparently, Hewlett-Packard owns EDS Israel, which supplies the computer systems of the Israeli Ministry of Defense and produces high-tech equipment like the Basel system, a biometric permit system that controls the movement of Palestinian workers through checkpoints in Gaza and the West Bank. So there's the list, and it's also posted at whatreallyhappened.com. And again, I don't buy Israeli-made batteries, not because of a boycott, because my experience with them is they're lousy batteries. I had them in our home alarm system in a previous residence. They supposed to last 6 months. They'd fail after 2 weeks and always in the middle of the night. So, Israeli batteries, bad. Don't waste your money on them. Okay, so, all right. I'm just looking at stuff that's coming on in. The Israeli courts have now ordered the demolition of the Palestinian village of Khan al-Ahmar, and the community is going to be forcibly relocated next to a landfill in Abu Dis. This is a rundown West Bank suburb of East Jerusalem. So they're taking away their homes. They're going to force them to live next to a landfill, and you know how toxic those are. And they're just going to take their land here. Now, Israel's Supreme Court has rubber-stamped the Israeli use of snipers against unarmed protesters, saying that it was justified because unarmed protesters, including children, are part of an armed conflict between Israel and Hamas. The only people who were down there at that fence with weapons were the Israelis. So it's just a reminder that even a Supreme Court can be bought and paid for and totally corrupt. The House of Representatives has passed their version of the 2019 military spending bill, the National Defense Authorization Act. Their grand total came to $717 billion for the military, wars, and nuclear arms for next fiscal year. And there is another substantial increase in military spending, broadly supported within both parties. Or rather, this is another substantial increase. Only 7 Republicans voted against the bill. Democrats were a bit more split. Either way, amendments intended to limit nuclear weapons spending were roundly defeated. They're going back to building more bombs. Interestingly enough, up in Canada, apparently they're having a shortage of recruits as well. And the Canadian Armed Forces is starting to offer waivers to foreign nationals in certain select cases to allow them to enlist in the Canadian military as a way to boost its numbers. Britain is on the verge of replacing the United States as Turkey's major Western weapons suppliers, as the two European nations are set to take a strategic turn in an already growing defense relationship. So Britain, Turkey moving together, both of them moving away from the United States. You can see that there's a pattern here. And don't forget how upset the United States was when Turkey was buying air defense missiles from Russia instead of the U.S. They tried a little of that thuggism, arm twisting. Didn't get very far with it. Turning to the domestic politics here, this morning, just before the congressional break over the Memorial Day holiday, there was a classified meeting at the White House attended by Republicans and Democrats and the president's lawyers, which caused the Democrats, who hadn't been invited in the first place but got in at the last second, to complain and scream and whine and moan as they usually do. Oddly enough, though, you know, nothing has leaked out of there, which is odd in and of itself at the White House. But Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is saying that after he attended this classified briefing, he continues to support Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation and also the investigation into the FBI's actions during the 2016 election, meaning how they handled Hillary Clinton's server. Well, maybe he's just not paying attention, but Mitch McConnell is in a position where he should know that there is nothing to Robert Mueller's case. He's been at it for a year now, spent millions of dollars. He's come up with some procedural crimes by people who were not even connected to the Trump campaign when it happened. That dodgy dossier is a total fake. The FISA warrant was completely invalid. How much more do you need to see, McConnell, to understand this is a hatchet job, not an investigation? Now, one piece of good news, and this took yet another lawsuit from a stonewalling Department of Justice and FBI. And details of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's contacts with the media are going to be public by early September. Now, he's supposed to be running a secret investigation, so he wasn't supposed to be in contact with the media. But somebody was certainly leaking stuff to the media. A lot of people think it was Wiseman. And that may actually get one of the defendants off the hook legally, because the leaks poisoned the jury pool. It's a real mess there. It's a real mess. Over at Judicial Watch, Tom Fitton is making a comment, and I heartily agree. President Trump should direct the Department of Justice and the FBI and other agencies to comply with Freedom of Information Act requests and stop the stonewall. Stop forcing Judicial Watch to spend time and waste money having to go to court over and over and over again. Trump has that authority to say, you honor these Freedom of Information Act requests. These are all public records. None of them are classified. You are supposed to turn them over on request. That's the law. And if anybody in the Department of Justice or the FBI refuses, then Trump says, okay, I'll accept your resignation. For all of Trump's talk tough about Iran and North Korea, he seems totally cowed by the Washington establishment. He needs to put on those presidential brass knuckles, and he needs to start getting his government in order, because right now it's not his government. He's along for the ride. He's up there looking good. He gets to travel a lot, make a lot of speeches, but he's a passenger right now. And he's supposed to be the man in charge. He's turning out to be a very weak leader, susceptible to flattery. Interesting little development. As you know, Stephen Halper has been outed as one of the spies placed inside the Trump campaign and later the Trump transition team. And yet another scandal has come on out, because it turns out Halper is behind the allegations made about Svetlana Lukova and Michael Flynn during the general's visit to Cambridge in 2014, where he served as the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. So in other words, Stephen Halper set up the entire case against Michael Flynn. They've been doing this right from the very beginning, just building this plan to tear it all down. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. So all of a sudden, this Stephen Halper, who's described as an FBI informant, but he got something like $1 million for whatever it was he was doing inside the Trump camp. It turns out he is also the source of the original allegation of Russian collusion involving National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Because Michael Flynn, when he was visiting Cambridge, met with a British citizen who was born in Russia, Svetlana Lukova, and nobody can prove that she has any connection to the current Russian government. But that's all it took to basically denounce Michael Flynn and try and get him into legal trouble with a perjury trap. It's just out and out hatchet job. They created this out of thin air. They fabricated a crime. All right, let's take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike?
Doing okay.
Hey, did you talk about the S-500? The world record supposedly hit a target 300 miles away, which is 50 miles more than the S-400 did.
No, I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, the S-400, that's using the 40 N6 missile. That was 250 miles. This one reached 300, the S-500 Prometheus, but they're saying it can, depending on the missile, 370, which is like incredible.
Well, it depends on the warhead. The heavier the warhead, the shorter the range, obviously.
Yeah, the S-500 only has 2 tubes. The S-400 has 4. And I believe they have 4 different types of missiles that the S-400 uses. And I don't know if you know this, Mike, but there was like rumors that it could hit ballistic missiles. that's not what this is for. The A135 is the one that you see that video of this flaming ball just coming out of the ground. Did you ever see that video?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, that was the A130. That's an anti-ballistic missile. The S500 is for,
Air defense.
S5. Yeah, exactly. But, hey, Mike, I watched the St. Petersburg forum today.
Yeah.
And, boy, Macron was really laying it on Putin. He's like, dear Mr. Putin, Your Excellency. So, I mean, maybe Macron has flipped. I don't know.
Well, we were reporting on this earlier in the show, where France appears to be pivoting away from the United States and toward Russia, and we're starting to see the other member states of the European Union more or less straighten at the leash. The era where the U.S. government would snap its fingers and all these nations would immediately snap to attention seems to have gone away.
And I also overheard a French person, one of the people from, I think Macron actually said that business have increased 20 to 25%. That's with the sanctions on. So, I mean, so business is still going on.
Okay, I got to let you go, Dustin. We got to do a station identification. We'll be back with hour 2 after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, earlier in the week, we were talking about how one of these public interest groups had finally, through lawsuits, obtained a whole bunch of communication from Hillary Clinton's State Department and the Clinton Foundation showing that there was, in fact, a massive pay-to-play operation going on. Contrary to Hillary Clinton's statement, there was no firewall. There was, in fact, a defined conduit of communications, so that anybody who wanted a favor from the State Department just sort of somehow found out they needed to make a donation to the Clinton Foundation. And after the foundation received the donation, the State Department machinery would then grind into action and provide what was needed. And records clearly show that nations that donated to the Clinton Foundation got favorable treatment in arms exports deals, and nations that did not were left out in the cold. So they've got all this stuff. And what's really amazing, WikiLeaks got one of these documents out there. They're actually using the words pay to play in these communications. Well, this evidence is overwhelmingly obvious. Where are the government investigators into this? Pay for play, I mean, that's outright corruption. There is far more evidence of corruption right now in Hillary Clinton's State Department than there is of collusion in the Trump administration. Where's the corporate media? Oh, we got to get Trump. We got to get Trump. Where's the Department of Justice? We got to get Trump. We got to get Trump. Where's the FBI? We got to get Trump. We got to get Trump. These people are obsessed, and they are not doing the job we, the American people, demand. Now, you remember the Imran Awan case? This was these IT experts who were brought in to the Capitol building. Security checks apparently were waived on them, and they were hired by a lot of the members of Congress to maintain their office computers, and apparently were engaged in massive espionage. Now, Imran Awan is heading toward trial. And for some reason, the Capitol Police turned over a trove of evidence intended for the prosecution to the defense attorneys instead. And, of course, the police are just saying, oh, it was just an accident. It was just an accident. And they went to the defense attorneys and they got back the material, but not before the defense attorneys had copied it all. So, yeah, it was an accident. Just an accident. Yeah. Sure. An accident. Anybody who thinks it's anything else, you're a Russian mole. Story just coming out of the Gateway Pundit. Apparently, Obama administration attorneys team with Seth Rich's brother, and they're suing the private eye team investigating the murder of Seth Rich. So if the murder really was as described, a robbery that didn't take the wallet, watch, or cell phone, why would anybody care? Well, they're using Seth Rich's brother, Aaron Rich, as kind of a front man out here saying, it's defamatory. How dare you say that Seth Rich would leak emails? I'm going to sue. Don't you dare say these things. Lawfare. And there's an important question that's inside all of this. The Seth Rich family, they didn't have a lot of money. They couldn't afford their own private detective back when they were still looking for an honest answer about what was going on. But now all of a sudden, they have huge sums of money to hire some of the most powerful law firms in the United States, including a former president's counselor. So the big guns are definitely up there, and it just screams, something's being covered up. Something is being covered up. Over in Texas, they just had their governor runoff vote, and it was notable in that Democratic voter turnout hit the lowest point in 100 years. And so this is setting a stage for a showdown between Democrat Lupe Valdez and the current Republican governor, Greg Abbott. So the brand is damaged. The brand is damaged. Millennials are turning away from liberalism because they're seeing just how absurd it's become. So let's talk about the economic news here. Over in London, at the London Metals Exchange, let me repeat that, at the London Metals Exchange, they're launching a metals future market denominated in the yuan. They're planning to introduce yuan-denominated metal products, another blow to the almighty U.S. dollar. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Over in Seattle, as you know, they wanted to have basically a workers' head tax that would tax obviously large employers more in order to have some kind of funds to deal with the homeless situation. And this upset some of the companies located in Seattle like Amazon and Starbucks. And they all got huffy and said, well, we're going to leave maybe. And it's going back and forth, which shows their humanity. But apparently, the same thing is about to happen in Silicon Valley. Because as you know, while the Silicon Valley tech giants and CEOs are all very wealthy, the area itself is very poor. And so now Silicon Valley is weighing a tax on the big employers as well. There has to be, the economy has to be rebalanced. You can't leave it this far out of whack for very long without risking revolution. Article over here, this one came from Oraz.com. Walmart is paying $20 billion to shareholders. And they're saying with that money, they could have boosted wages to over $15 an hour for their workers. But of course, the shareholders come first. All right. Now, Obamacare plans, they're expected to jump again next year, an average of 15%. Some places will be more, some places will be less. What a disaster Obamacare was. That was another promise that Trump made. Well, we've been talking about San Francisco. We've been talking about the impact of the declining economy. We've been talking about the impact of the illegal immigrants, the homeless, the refugees. And now, according to this article out of Natural News, the problem is so bad. San Francisco has become such a filthy, liberal pothole that the tourism industry is now begging city leaders to clean it up because the tourism numbers are starting to drop off. People come to San Francisco, they see that it doesn't look as nice as it does in the postcards. They go on social media and they say, wow, this place is a mess. And the numbers are going down. So I don't know what San Francisco is going to do because, again, all the money is locked up with the money junkies. Over in Great Britain, the kerfuffle over the Galileo system continues. Now, to catch you up to date, the Galileo system is a global positioning system like America's GPS. And after GPS came online, a lot of other spheres of influence, if you will, decided they did not want to be dependent on a U.S. positioning system, because in the event of a conflict or even just an economic war, the U.S. could shut it off, and they, being dependent on it, they'd be stuck. So Russia's built one of their own, China's built one of their own, and the European Union is getting ready to launch one of their own called Galileo. And Great Britain has been in on the development phase of this whole system. And now, because of the talk of Brexit, the European Union is saying, well, you're not going to be allowed to use this system. We're going to kick you on out. And in return, Great Britain is saying, well, then you owe us compensation for the development work we've already done on this. We're not just going to, you know, throw away our investment in that. So that is starting to become an issue as well. Up near the border with Canada, it's been discovered that a pamphlet is being distributed at American hotels and bus terminals near the Canadian border, giving advice for migrants how to cross illegally into Canada. Now, the Canadians call this irregular crossing into Canada, but apparently an American group in the town of Plattsburgh, New York, which wants to help refugees, is distributing the pamphlet. A Quebec member of parliament is calling for the federal government to do something about this because they don't want the United States refugee and immigrant problem to become Canada's immigrant and refugee problem. Getting on back to Starbucks, Starbucks has got a real PR problem on its hand. First of all, they showed how insensitive they were to the homeless by screaming at Seattle's suggested tax. Then they got into trouble when there were two black men who were arrested at a Philadelphia location. Now, the black men were not customers. They just came on in to use the restroom, and things got a little bit out of control. Well, then Starbucks, in order to please the liberals, because Starbucks is a liberal lunch place, came on out and said that everybody's treated like a customer, even if they're not a customer. They can come on in, they can sit and enjoy the ambiance, they can use the restrooms, and the result, predictably, is that customers of Starbucks are finding needles, drug bags, and blood all over the walls of the bathrooms. And it's turning off the paying customers. Huge mess. All right, let's take a phone call. Fred in Arkansas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Michael. Memorial Day is Monday.
Yes.
And I've got a couple of quick comments I would like to make that say some nice things about Vietnam veterans.
Okay.
All right, here I go. This is the first anecdote. I was on active duty in the year 1980. I was in the Air Force. And I had a conversation that year with a Vietnam veteran. And basically, we were just talking around. And he said, during the war in Vietnam, he said, we calculated that a certain real percentage of our air crewmen, you know, like pilots on the various fighter planes and helicopters.
Yes.
He said, we calculated a certain number of crew members would undergo traumatic amputations when they were shot down and crash landed. And he waited for that remark to sink into my head, which it did. And then I'll tell you what he said next. He said, in the whole 10 years of the war, they never returned an amputee. So he was basically speaking to the absolute brutality of the North Vietnamese, which I was in college and high school during all the war years. So I didn't know anything about what really happened in Vietnam. So that's my first comment, and I want to point out that's a very brave statement for a man to make, and you could see that he has quite a bit of courage. Now, the second point I'd like to make is Vietnam veterans are often misportrayed as being trigger-happy or baby killers, or they talk about the My Lai massacre. Now, I want to explain something that happened that was outside of their control entirely. Towards the end of the Second World War, there was a general who carried out a study. And what he did, he had a team of soldiers, and when men came back from combat missions against the Germans, he would take their rifles away from them and interview them and find out if they had actually fired their rifles at the Germans. And he had a crew who inspected their rifles, and the decision was reached that the men who were fighting Germany in the Second World War did not shoot their rifles as often as they could have. Now, this general handed down a decision. I'm not going to tell you his name because it's not his fault, but you can find this out if you do a search. This general handed down a decision that instead of shooting at bullseye targets, which were a complete abstraction, the men who were going to Vietnam during basic training should shoot at human silhouette targets. So the takeaway from this is that anytime somebody tells a Vietnam veteran that he was bloodthirsty and he wanted to shoot civilians, nothing like that happened, but he was actually trained psychologically to shoot at a human form and not an abstract form of a bullseye. So to whatever extent the Vietnam veteran was more aggressive or too aggressive compared to his father, that wasn't his fault at all. It was he went through a completely different training program. Now, to close up, let me explain. At the end of the war in Vietnam, we all felt very sick to our stomach, and we were all ashamed of ourselves. My dad came home from the Second World War, and I was born within about 2 years. And my friends, the Vietnam veterans that I went to school with, they came back to divorce papers. They never had children, most of them. And the question is, why were we made to feel so sick? I don't know why the politricksters and the media did that to us, but they did it. And right after the war, abortion was legalized, and we've killed 50 million babies, and we've replaced every one of those kids who could have been a native-born American. We have replaced them with an immigrant. So that's my message for today, is Vietnam veterans are absolutely blameless. They were very brave, and the war was thrown. It was made to look like we failed by the politicians and by the media, and we did nothing wrong. So I'm done speaking. Should I hang up, or do you want to ask me a question?
Thank you very much. We're going to let you go, and obviously I'm going to disagree with you on a couple of these points here. First of all, in any large organization, you're going to have some people who are more humane, some people who are less humane. I know that the movies like to glamorize the trigger-happy, violent soldiers who were basically in a position of, if you don't shoot first, then you're probably not coming home. As far as losing the war, the war was not thrown. They were in the jungles of Vietnam, just grinding up munitions to justify taxation of the American people until the American people finally had enough and got together. And Lyndon Johnson, in his biography, wrote that the day he looked out of the Oval Office and saw 1 million people on the mall protesting the war, was the day he knew the war had been lost. And I think the reason the Vietnam veterans fared so poorly compared to veterans of other wars was they had lost. And so they didn't have this idea of a victory, a positive, to offset the negative memories they were carrying around with them. I, too, grew up in that generation, and I, too, went to school with a lot of people who came back from Vietnam, and I got to know some of them very well. And they were carrying a lot of ghosts for things they had been ordered to do, just like we've seen more recently in Iraq. They've ordered to do things that are technically illegal under international law. And they carried that burden, and they didn't have anything positive to offset it, like a victory or medals or even the acclaim of a nation or the government. And so they were just getting hit on both sides, and that's why so many of them turned to drugs. Anyway, Fred, thank you for the information. And yes, Monday is Memorial Day, and I'm sure, and by the way, we're going to be here live. We're going to be here live. And in between the hot dogs and the hamburgers and the endless war movies on TV, you may want to think about what the reality is behind having to go to war, having to fight a war. I recommend strongly that you recall the words of Marine Corps Major General Smedley Butler, that war is just a racket. And it's not about bringing democracy to another nation. It's not about improving their lives in any way. It's not about saving them from a cruel tyrant. It's about commandeering their resources and their wealth by force of arms. It's about pipeline right-of-ways. It's about raw materials. It's about what currency those raw materials are being sold in. That's what it's really all about. And so as the U.S. government gets ready to gin up another war in Iran and another war in North Korea, you parents of military-age kids, you take a good look at those kids and ask if what these wars are really all about are worth the life of that child. And you're probably going to say no. You're probably going to say no. We need to take another break for commercials. The phone lines are open. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I can't believe over on Fox News, they're still going over the stupid NFL kneeling thing. This has gone on way too long. We're being conditized. We're being conditized for sure there. Now, getting on back to that commercial you just heard, if you would like to help Republic Broadcasting, and folks, the network really does need all of your help, the postal address to send a donation, either a check or money order, or if you prefer anonymity, cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Road, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number to call on in and pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during daylight hours, outside of normal business hours, extension 3. So let's move on here. Got an interesting little email. A lot of people responding to the caller who was talking about Vietnam, some positive, some negative. But this one really did stick out. I was an adult during the war and protested against it. I was never witness to anyone calling baby killer or spitting upon a serviceman or woman. When we heard about such things, our first reaction was that it was the FBI stooges doing it. We all had family members in the service either going over or coming back. Our goal was to bring them all back, period. And yes, this writer is absolutely right. The staged protests at the airport where the returning soldiers were coming on in, where they were screaming baby killer and spitting on them, that was an FBI COINTELPRO operation to make the peace movement, the anti-war movement, look bad. They were always pulling stuff like that. They didn't want people to sympathize with the goals of the anti-war movement. They wanted the American people to hate the anti-war movement. So they would pull stunts like this. Probably the most historic and worst one of all, of course, is the day the hippies took over Disneyland. And it was supposed to be a peaceful anti-war protest on Harbor Boulevard. Then it got led inside the park. There was vandalism involved. They were smoking pot on Tom Sawyer Island. All of it controlled by FBI informants on those college campuses. And if you are in college right now, I guarantee you, you've got informants around you. So, getting on back to Europe, more and more people are expressing concern over Julian Assange's situation at the Ecuadorian embassy. And they're saying that his refuge is in jeopardy. And they're saying it could be because the embassy says it's time for him to leave, or because he's just getting closet fever or cabin fever and he wants to get on out. But of course, the instant he walks on out, British authorities will arrest him and extradite him to the United States. And I'm sure the United States wants to talk to him to find out what he does know. Now, obviously, in Assange's absence, WikiLeaks is still running. They're still putting information out there. We've had some rather unusual incidents of violence across the United States. Apparently, over at Portland State University, hit-and-run incident, multiple people injured, and they're not sure if it was deliberate or not. Over in Indiana at a middle school, a student teacher hospitalized after a shooting. The suspect is in custody there. I wonder if he was on prescription psychiatric medication. Interesting little article here. This came from Freep.com. To stop school shootings, use Israel's approach to fighting terror. This from the Texas Attorney General. And basically, Israel solved the problem of school security long ago by hardening the target and tightening security practices. Every school with 100 or more students has at least one well-trained armed guard stationed at entrances to monitor who comes and goes. These guards receive rigorous training every 4 months, and they have to pass a qualification test to get back to that school. That's what we need here. Of course, the liberal gun grabbers are out there saying, ban the guns, everything will be fine. No, look at every liberal city where guns have been taken away from law-abiding citizens, like Chicago or Baltimore, and you'll see that banning guns does not solve the problem. Making sure everybody is armed, like they did down in Kennesaw, Georgia, that made crime go down. It dropped by 80%. Apparently, there was another mass shooting at Louis Bar and Grill in Oklahoma City, and an armed bystander shot and killed the shooter. He's being hailed as a hero. We've had another incident where a SWAT team has raided the wrong house, and apparently young children were traumatized and injured by flashbang grenades. An innocent father was terrorized and arrested by police, and their home was damaged. And it was an early morning, no-knock raid. They had the wrong house. Going to be a sweet lawsuit out of that one. These no-knock raids, what did they think they were going to find in a house with a bunch of kids? All right, we're going to do another commercial break here, and we'll be right back with more of the show. And aloha, America, welcome back to the show. Speaking of SWAT, back in December of last year, there was a swatting incident. And if you don't know what the term means, it means you call the police and you report a fake crime, and you say there's a man with a gun, or he's got an AR-15 or something, and it triggers a SWAT attack on the victim of this stunt. And in the case of this one back on December 28th of last year, Andrew Finch was the victim, and he was shot and killed outside of his home by police who had been fooled into believing Finch was armed and dangerous, which he was not. And they tracked down the people who actually played the prank, Tyler Barris, Casey Vinner, and Shane Gaskill. They're facing charges after a district court grand jury ruled to indict them on multiple counts related to that death. So it's a dumb thing to do. It's a cruel thing to do, even if nobody is shot. Anytime there's a SWAT raid, there's always property damage. They knock that door down, and anything that's on the other side of it just gets smashed. You know, they go on through. It's a terrible experience to go through. And I know because we went through it. Now, in our case, we weren't swatted and we weren't committing a crime. We were the victims of an honest mistake at the police station. But it's still, I remember vividly my mother back up against the wall with a shotgun at her throat by one of these goons. Getting into the world of political correctness, you're going to love this one, and I think Claire's going to love it as well because she does choir. Harvard University has 3 choirs. They have a mixed choir, the Harvard Radcliffe Collegium Musicum. Then they have a men's choir and a women's choir. Now, if you know how composers work, they write music specifically for collections of voices. There is music written specifically for women's choir or specifically for men's choir because of the split between the soprano, altos, and the tenors and the basses. But Harvard, yielding to political correctness and opposing any same-sex organizations, has now ordered the Harvard Women's Choir to admit men and the Harvard Men's Choir to admit women, even though there's already a mixed choir. And I think it's silly things like this that are turning off millennials to political correctness. It's gone too far. It's become a caricature of itself. Now, as you know, there are these general data protection regulation rules that have come into effect as of today. These basically European privacy laws, they took effect today. And Facebook and Google are already in trouble because the way this is supposed to work, and you've probably already seen this when you go to websites or you get email, companies are informing you about their new regulations, and they give you the choice of whether to continue giving them access to your data, but you are still able to use their sites if you refuse. You can turn it off and make yourself invisible. Now, apparently, Facebook, Google, Instagram, and WhatsApp are breaking the terms of GDPR by threatening customers and saying that they'll be unable to use the sites unless they agree to share their data. So apparently, campaign group NOIB EU has already filed legal complaints. That's, again, dirty business, but that's American corporate behavior here. Apparently, there actually is a Donald Trump 2020 campaign. And he's already, apparently the campaign itself, the campaign manager, Brad Perscale, is already putting Facebook and Twitter on notice over censorship of conservatives and saying that it will not be tolerated, that Facebook and Twitter have to address concerns over a very biased filtration system that is out there. And I'm not expecting Facebook and Twitter to do a thing about it, but at least they're calling attention to that fact. Now, here we go with another Booga Booga, your daily dose of fear. This is out of the Express in Great Britain. And once again, they're quoting an anonymous government minister saying that Russia is getting ready to cripple the city of London with a cyber attack after the World Cup. And apparently this anonymous minister said, things are eerily quiet on the Russian front. And the lack of action is making the government feel uneasy. In other words, what this guy is saying, Russia is doing nothing wrong, but that looks suspicious. So be afraid and do as you're told. A lot of people still talking about that little Alexa mess up where, and this even hit the corporate news. Apparently, this couple were having a private conversation in their home. They were talking about a renovation project, and all of a sudden they get a call from somebody on a contact list, their contact list, a business associate saying, your Alexa has been hacked. I can hear everything you're saying. It's being sent to me. And they didn't believe it, and this guy sent the recordings back. And yes, it was them standing there talking about hardwood floors. Well, they've removed the Alexa devices, and apparently their home was totally given over to the Internet of Things. There was an Alexa in every single room. Everything was plugged into it, so now they're having to go back to manual controls. But it was a really, really bad scare. And a lot of people are saying they don't want Alexa if this sort of thing can happen. Well, Amazon is sort of hemming and hawing and coming out with an explanation. And they're saying the problem is that the Echo woke up after hearing a word in the couple's conversation that sounded like Alexa, the usual trigger to begin recording. And then the speaker later heard send message during the conversation, at which point the device asked to whom. Now, the pair apparently weren't hearing the Alexa. They continued talking in the background, and the Echo system interpreted part of the chat to identify a name in the couple's contact list. Alexa then asked aloud if they wanted to send a message and thought it heard the word right in the continuing conversation. That's their explanation. And it does sound somewhat plausible, but what it tells us is their voice recognition isn't as accurate as they would like it to be, or it should be. One other situation, those of you who are keeping your Alexas, you might want to do, I understand you can change that name. You can change it from Alexa to something else. So change it to something that you're never ever likely to say or even come close to in real life, like Rumpelstiltskin. Just rename it, Rumpelstiltskin or something like that. That way, it's not going to turn on until you want it to turn on. There's a fix for you there. Okay, I don't spend a lot of time with computer games. I'm not a computer gaming person, except for flight simulators. I love flight simulators and spacecraft simulators. But apparently, there are a lot of fans of this franchise, if you will, called Battlefield. And apparently, they just came out with Battlefield 5, which was promised as being true to history in its portrayal of World War II. And the game has come on out, and gamers are angry and outraged over what is very obviously a social justice-themed version of the video game. And it's even prompted its own hashtag, Not My Battlefield. And apparently, the soldiers, it's all multicultural, which was not the case in World War II. There is a woman character who it's a recurring theme, a woman with a missing arm fighting in the thick of battle. So they've got a disabled person, they've got a woman, and everybody's speculating it's probably going to turn out she's also a lesbian. So, bad move on the part. Again, everyone's turning against political correctness and social justice. It's had its day. It's time to let it go away. Now, as you know, there are some problems with autonomous self-driving cars, and Uber is starting to try and use them to get more cars in the field, because it's turned out that most people working for Uber are actually winding up with less than minimum wage anyway. But apparently there was an accident involving an Uber car that struck a pedestrian, and the National Transportation Safety Board took a look at it and said the records of the self-driving car said that it spotted the pedestrian about 6 seconds before fatally hitting her, but did not stop because the system used to automatically apply brakes in potentially dangerous situations had been disabled. Now, who would do a thing like that? Now, the emergency braking maneuvers were not enabled while Uber's cars are under complete computer control to reduce the potential for erratic vehicle behavior. So I guess it was intentional. Instead, Uber relies on a human backup driver to intervene, but the system is not designed to alert the driver. Well, that's just bad engineering. You've got a self-driving car that sees a pedestrian, but can't stop because the brakes are disconnected. You rely on a human driver to exercise that discretion, but you don't tell the human driver that there's a problem. Not going to get me into one of those things. Okay, so let's talk about our volcano a little bit more. As we reported at the top of the show, just shortly before we went to airtime, there was another major ash eruption at Kilauea volcano. This one shot up to 10,000 feet in the air, and that makes it, I think, the second largest that we've had so far. The lava coming out of the Eastern Rift Zone is hotter, much more fluid, much more liquid. So it's just flowing out over a lot more ground. There is now a third area of the coastline where lava is entering the ocean and producing this Lays gas. Now, the good news is that apparently the lava that was approaching the Puna geothermal venture stopped and started going in another direction. So at this point, they're saying they dodged a bullet. The power plant is safe. The pressurized geothermal wells are safe, even though the lava actually destroyed an older version of the power plant on the same property. But apparently lava is spewing from active fissures at an estimated 40 to 60 cubic feet per second. This is over in Leilani Estates, and that's a lot of lava. It doesn't look like it's going to go away anytime soon. Okay. Apparently there's such damage over the area that even houses that have not actually been burned by the lava may never be inhabitable again. Well, I can imagine if, say, 3 or 4 houses have been completely surrounded by a lava ring, if you will, it makes the houses impractical. It's going to be years before the lava is cool enough to cut through and create any kind of a roadway. It's very, very hard. It's got the consistency of poured concrete. So we saw the same thing when we toured Kaanapali. There were homes that hadn't actually been burned, but they were just simply abandoned here. Okay, now then. One really tragic story here. And again, as George Carlin says, you know, if you're going to buy a home on a volcano, don't be surprised if lava comes from your living room. But apparently, this family moved out to the Big Island just 2 weeks ago from Santa Cruz, California. And apparently, they've been planning this move for 10 years. And they bought a home, newly built home in Lanapuna Gardens. And they got to live in it for 2 weeks before they were forced to evacuate. And the home has been eaten by the volcano. So it is sad. Hopefully they had insurance. And again, I got a lot of inquiries about the situation with insurance. There is no private volcano lava insurance. It's actually considered not really needed because these eruptions happen so rarely. If you have a homeowner's policy with full coverage, yes, they will cover the loss of your home to the volcano. And apparently the state government has provided some kind of volcano lava insurance to that part of the state because they want to encourage people to live there and build it back up. And of course, those people on the Big Island can always do what they did in the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. Set the house on fire themselves and claim that they lost the house to fire before the volcano could even get there. So let's talk about human-caused... Oh, we have a caller on the line. Mateus in Canada. Aloha, Mateus. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
You were going to say human-caused global warming.
Yes.
Yeah, so is it true that all volcanologists come from the planet Vulcan?
No.
Oh, okay. That's just,
but they're all vulcanized.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out how to do something with that. Couldn't figure it out. Hey, so regarding Trump's campaign manager, Kelly Kaonohi, she said, well, who doesn't love a royal wedding, right? And I was thinking, like, I don't. And, like, I'm just going to say it. Like, shame on anybody who really loves this royal wedding business. Like, for one, it's these people are on welfare. The biggest welfare bums in the world. Two, they're so entitled and privileged grotesquely that they get the finest of everything possible from the day they're born to the day they die, literally on a silver platter. It's the finest. Do you want the finest handmade car in the world? There you go. It's on the taxpayers. Would you like the finest, most expensive champagne every time? There you go. Like, what is this? And then, so we're supposed to applaud that there's this grotesque expenditure of public funds to have this elaborate, offensively elaborate wedding, and then we're all supposed to be like good little useless, like unwashed masses that are like supposed to be mesmerized by it.
Well, we're at the end. We're at the end of the segment here. We're at the end of the segment here. I didn't watch the royal wedding. I have no intention of looking at the endless replays. And you're right, it's archaic, but as long as the British people think this is cool, it's going to go on. Anyway, Mateus, we got to let you go. Going to take a commercial break. Back with the next segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're coming up on the top of the hour and the lovely Lady Claire. And now it's time to talk about human-caused global warming, because over in Newfoundland, they are digging out from more than 30 centimeters of snow. This is yesterday, and more snow is headed on in. I mean, we're on the cusp of June, and we're still getting not just snow, heavy snow. So again, it should be very obvious the planet is cooling. Remember back when they were saying snowfalls are now a thing of the past? Boy, were they wrong. And they're still trying to push this Kool-Aid on us because they want your money. They want your carbon taxes. They want your obedience. They want you afraid to do anything that might harm the precious planet Earth. You know, like dropping bombs on other parts of it here. They're starting to see the beginnings of the hurricane season. Our local hurricane warning center opens up for its annual season a week from today. And Tropical Storm Alberto has formed in the Atlantic. It's expected to make landfall right on Memorial Day. That's going to be seriously inconvenient for the backyard barbecues over there. Everyone's been talking about the opioid crisis and just how bad is it. And it turns out it is pretty bad, because apparently there's alarming research from Seattle indicates the population is consuming so much OxyContin, it's seeping into the local water supply and contaminating wildlife. And apparently they've discovered mussels off of Seattle are found with oxycodone in their systems. I mean, this huge pharmacopoeia that's being pumped through our bodies gets into the water system, gets into the oceans. What is it doing to life in the ocean? This is so short-sighted. But that has come to represent America's mindset right now. I want to make my money now. I don't care what it does down the road. That's somebody else's problem. I want my pile of cash now. So we know that medications that you're on go into the water supply, can come right back out your faucet. You can be getting medications that are inappropriate for your illness. You can be getting medications that you're violently allergic to. I'm starting to wonder how many of the multiple 21st century scourges that we are seeing are actually artifacts of this overabundance of pharmaceutical product that is just seeping into every corner of our biosphere. There's no way you can get away from it. If you're picking up mussels off the shore in Seattle and they already have OxyContin in them, that is a major problem. It is a major contamination, pollution. Where are the environmentalists now? They're always screaming about global warming in your plastic bags. Look at the environmental damage caused by the pharmaceutical industries. Why aren't they complaining about that? Probably. Oh, there's the music. All right, we're going to take a break here. And when we come on back, the lovely Lady Claire will have joined us. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on YouTube, this gorgeous creature sitting to the other side of the view is the lovely Lady Claire, who likes to come on Fridays with her point of view. But before we get into your talking points, I want to remind everybody that Front Sight Training Academy promotion has been extended to June 2nd. Now, that's just a week away, so you're going to have to move to take advantage of it. But you still have a chance to get in on this deal. Okay, so what's the first thing you want to talk about?
First thing I want to talk about, it has been a really bad week for the Democratic Republic of Congo. And 2 late-stage Ebola patients have broken their quarantine, and it's anyone's guess as to how many they may have infected. And it has been confirmed to have spread to Mbandaka, which is a transportation hub and home to over 1 million people. As of the time that the post was written, 31 cases of the disease have been confirmed. Okay, all right.
You clicked in the other side of the screen.
And of the 31 cases, 9 have died. And 3 individuals confirmed to have contracted the disease, 2 of which were showing significant symptoms, managed to escape quarantine and mingle with an unknown number of people.
Well, that is really bad.
Yeah.
That is bad. Now, by late stage and symptoms, they mean hemorrhagic, meaning they're bleeding out virus.
Yeah.
And given that I don't know which strain of Ebola we're dealing with here.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know what the incubation period is.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to say, I'm going to just take a scientific guess here.
Okay.
That in 3 to 5 days, we're going to start seeing an explosion of cases over there.
Yeah, I'm hoping that the CDC is going to be on this to prevent its spread here in the U.S. There was another article I came across on Blacklisted News, which is a very sober blog, and I encourage people to take a look. If you're looking at independent media, look at ours, but also look at others which have a high degree of truth and respect, at least from our perspective. And while teachers across the U.S. were protesting for higher wages and increased funding for public schools, apparently police officers in one state are actively stealing millions of dollars with a mill in funds that were supposed to go for public education. And Mike, they're getting away with it. Now, the state of Missouri amended its Civil Forfeiture Act in 2001 to force departments to deposit the proceeds into the public education fund as required by the state constitution.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, but at the time, police departments in Missouri had generated $32 million in seized property over the course of a decade. Matt Lemieux, the executive director of the ACLU of Eastern Missouri, said that he hoped the legal change would stop the ongoing practice of policing for profit, which is what the forfeiture laws allow. And he's saying it is astounding that such a law was needed. The fact that seizure had to be defined in the law to make some police departments comply is really disgraceful.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, and 17 years after the loophole was closed legally, there's a report from the ACLU which has revealed that only a tiny fraction of the proceeds from the property seized by Missouri police have gone to public education, which means these police in the state of Missouri are literally robbing the public of millions of dollars in property and then robbing students and teachers by withholding the funds from their designated location. Mike, this is so wrong, I don't even know where to begin.
Well, it is wrong. It absolutely is wrong,
Yeah.
and it's a reminder of just how corrupted our system has become.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right now, I'd like to bop on over to the situation of Julian Assange.
We did talk about
You
this
did.
one.
Okay, so I think it's only a matter of time before he is arrested by British police and mandated over to the U.S. for punishment for telling the truth. And
well, I'm wondering.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if somebody's working on a way to get him out of that embassy
Mhm.
past the British authorities. I don't know, hot air balloon down into the sewer system or something.
yeah. And another accompanying article, which I thought was interesting. Both Democrats and Republicans blame the messenger when leaked emails are made available. Now, in the 2016 election, when WikiLeaks published John Podesta's leaked emails, Democrats freaked and blamed WikiLeaks and even tried to lie about the validity of those emails. Many supporters of the Democratic Party to this day believe that WikiLeaks and or Julian Assange should face legal consequences for publishing those hacked emails. Of course, Republicans cheered on that effort. Sean Hannity back in 2010 was screaming about how Assange was waging his war against the U.S. by publishing the leaked documents from Chelsea Manning and demanding that Obama arrest Assange. And he's done 180. He's
Yes.
now one of Julian Assange's most vocal supporters and has even had him interviewed on the show. And, but of course, the shoe changes feet very frequently.
Yeah, it does. And by the way, Sean
Yeah.
Hannity just pulled ahead of Rush Limbaugh as America's most listened to man.
Whoa. Okay.
We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And the situation here is, obviously WikiLeaks is continuing to operate even in the absence of Julian Assange. It has gone on way too long. And I'm one of those people who early on I thought Assange might be some kind of a disinfo operation because of the way he had just appeared overnight and shot to the front covers of all the news magazines while blogs that had been leaking and, truth-telling for 10 years at that time were being ignored. But at this point, it does seem like pretty much everything out of WikiLeaks has been the real deal.
Yep.
And I would like to see a solution where Assange can just basically go home, and the U.S. and Great Britain be told that, look, if you don't want these things to come on out about what you're doing, don't do them.
Yeah. Yeah. And there is a gentleman who's been in the public eye, Elliot Brady.
Yes.
Apparently, there has been a leak now of his emails, and he's not taking it very well, to the point of issuing a subpoena to the AP to try to uncover the news organization's source for his emails. Now, no one is saying it's okay to hack into someone's emails, but in both cases, we're talking about those who are upset about an email leak going after the organization and publishing the details of the leak and blaming the messenger. And the article goes on to state, just because the documents are leaked or hacked and possibly obtained through questionable means, it doesn't mean that the news organization can't publish them. This is kind of a gray area right now. Nor does it mean that they have to hand over the details of their sources, which I believe is still protected under First Amendment free speech or Fifth Amendment.
Actually, there's nothing in the First Amendment that says you're allowed to protect your sources. It's often been argued that way, but we've seen all of these cases where reporters will go to jail for a long time for refusing to name their source. So you're right, it's absolutely a gray area. And basically what it comes on down to is government and corporations that want to keep secret the nefarious things they're doing versus news organizations, these days the independent media, who feel the public has a right to know what the government is up to. And so there's always going to be this ongoing battle. And they're always trying to skew the system to favor their point of view. We've seen that with the rescinding of all these whistleblower protection laws. There used to be a lot of laws out there to protect people who blew the whistle on illegal, dangerous activities by corporations and government. Today, it's all gone. I remember right after TWA 800 got shot down off of Long Island, Bill Clinton rescinded whistleblower protection for several of the Navy units that were involved in the recovery.
Yes, I remember that also. And bouncing over to the world of higher education, and this surprised me like crazy. In some colleges, snowflake disability now gets you more time on tests. It sure as heck wasn't that way when I was in college. And snowflake is a derogatory, informal term, an overly sensitive or easily offended person, or one who believes they are entitled to special treatment on account of their supposedly unique characteristics. Now, that's from the Oxford English Dictionary. And so the article goes on to ask, is being a snowflake a disability?
Socially, it is.
This is apparently the case at a pseudo-elite and more colleges, where up to 1 in 4 students are classified as disabled, often simply because they experience stress and anxiety and are thus given special accommodations. This can sometimes mean getting twice as long as their peers to take exams. Mike, that is so wrong.
If stress and anxiety makes you disabled, then we can get one of those handicap parking things for the car.
Oh, dear, But, kids of that generation have got to learn to grow a little bit of a spine here.
Well, we'll throw them into a war. That'll toughen them up real quick.
Oh, please not. No, not like that. But with life is never really generally fair. And if things get tough, grab a helmet and put it on. I'm talking about mentally, not a physical helmet. That's a metaphor. At Pomona College in California, for instance, 5% of students fell into the category in 2014. Now 22% are classified as disabled because of this. This merely reflects other private colleges, and as the Wall Street Journal reports, at Hampshire, Amherst, and Smith colleges in Massachusetts, and Yeshiva University in New York, 1 in 5 students are classified as disabled. At Oberlin College in Ohio, a brilliant music school, by the way, one of the teachers I had in college went there. Amazing. It's 1 in 4. And at Marlborough College in Vermont, it's 1 in 3. Safe space isn't what real life is about. And occasionally you get some bounces and some bruises, but hopefully you learn from the bounces and the bruises. And to classify this as a mental health problem, it's just unbelievable to me.
It really is. It really is. To say that being a snowflake is now a disability.
Yeah.
If anything, it's self-inflicted.
Yeah.
You know, they've done it to themselves.
Yeah, and this brings us to a second factor. Other students, seeing the ones who are defining themselves as snowflakes get breaks, some students realize that they can also advantage themselves by claiming a disability status when it's not really true.
That's why the numbers are so high. You're going to have people who are going to say, well, yeah, I'm not going to get discriminated against on the basis of I'm not disabled.
Yeah.
You know, and I can understand why it's 1 in 3 at that one school.
Mm-hmm.
But if this thing gets going, you could literally have the colleges declaring their students, all of them disabled because of this anxiety and stress. Next thing after that, mandatory medication.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And we know how that goes down, which is not well.
Nope.
And if you've ever not bopped over to it, you might want to take a look at a website called SSRI Stories. One ending is .org or .com.
I think it's .org now. I think the .com one got shut down.
Okay, but .org. And if you have a kid where the teacher is recommending some kind of medication to take down any kind of hyperactivity, read about it. Read these stories.
Yeah, you got to read these stories. And don't forget, even Psychology Today, we reported on this early in the week, even Psychology Today came on out and said, look, the reality is kids come in different types. Some are more active, some are more quiet, some are leaders, some are followers. And it has really been detrimental for a committee of psychologists to get together and sort of decide what an ideal human child is going to be like, and then medicate everybody who falls outside that definition. It's great for the bottom line. It's great for business, but it's just not realistic.
And the other thing you need to do if you've got a child who's been recommended for medication, and the doctor's not going to like this much, but ask them if they are being compensated in any way by the pharmaceutical company making that drug. I think in full fairness, I think the public has a right to know if their doctor is getting paid or compensated in any way for prescribing a drug.
Yeah.
It's important. I'd like to go over now to the issue of torture in American jails. And there was a very disturbing image reported by Matt Agarist, who is one of the good guys. This is my main good guy. This is one of the good guys, Matt Agarist at Free Thought Project. And footage has just been released this week showing an incident that led to a Georgia jail supervisor being charged with multiple felonies. And in the video, Deputy Harry Dallas Battle is seen repeatedly tasering a man in the midsection while he is strapped to a restraint chair. The man being tortured, Brandon Kaufman, has filed a federal civil rights suit against the jail after he was left permanently injured by the incident. And after seeing on video torturing a restrained man, Battle was arrested the following August. According to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, Battle was charged with battery, making a false statement, and violation of oath of office. However, even though Battle was charged after the investigators watched the video, when the Polk grand jury heard the matter, it did not return an indictment.
That is pretty sick.
Yikes.
That's a condemnation of the people on that grand jury.
Yeah, and after torturing an entirely restrained man on video and lying about it in his report, the deputy escaped all charges and was allowed to quietly resign from the sheriff's department.
Apparently with his full pension.
Yeah, and Dallas took the cartridge out of his taser and dry stunned Mr. Kaufman while he was strapped in the chair. And as Kaufman's attorney noted, he suffered several burns, not just electric shock, but the burn of the taser as well. And for Jeff Sessions, our Attorney General, I have a word for you, sir. And you're still welcomed over for tea, although I disagree with you a lot. If you want to make Americans respect all cops, Jeff Sessions, our Attorney General, is going to have to stop these incidents from happening in the first place. Statistically, there is no war on the police. But I'm seeing in incidents like this, some police are conducting their own private war on accused suspects.
And even innocent people. We had that story
yeah.
earlier about SWAT, before dawn, no-knock raid SWAT team, flashbang kids tossed in where, flashbang grenades tossed in where kids were.
Yeah.
And they had the wrong house.
Yeah. The house they actually wanted was next door. So Jeff Sessions, please stop these incidents and make sure that all cops are going exactly by the book. There are some good cops in this country. We happen to have a neighbor and a friend who's just wonderful. And she is someone I respect because she comes to the job to try to protect and serve the people around her. And that's beautiful.
She's good people, no question.
Very good. I'd like to go to a technological nightmare that Amazon has placed on people who buy its Alexa. And this is how Amazon's Alexa records and shares private conversations without your permission.
Yes.
And as it turns out, the scandal over Amazon's Alexa's voice-controlled personal assistant recording and sharing private conversations both with hackers and people on the user's contact list is very much more serious than the company had feared. Translation, the company knew this was going on, but they didn't want to know or didn't want to share with consumers what the extent of it was.
Well, as we mentioned earlier, Amazon has come on out with what they say probably happened. This couple was having a conversation about renovation in their home.
Right.
Alexa heard something it thought was Alexa.
A trigger, yeah.
That switched it on. And then it thought it heard send message. And then when Alexa said to whom, it picked up a word that linked to somebody in the contact list.
Yep.
It then asked aloud if they wanted to send a message and heard right. And as I said before, there is a simple fix for this. My understanding is you can change the name of the wake up command from Alexa to something else. And you could change it, like I said earlier in the show, Rumpelstiltskin. Okay? Say that one three times fast.
Yes, I know.
Okay. Or some other really gratuitously complex and polysyllabic name.
Yeah.
So that you're sure that Alexa is only waking up when you want it to wake up.
And not other times.
All right, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Claire, what's the next thing you want to talk about?
Well, I know that you've covered this this budget for the military, $717 billion. And I have a few things to say about that. But one amendment that did manage to make its way into the NDAA was from Representatives Rokana, a Democrat from California, and Barbara Lee, another Democrat of California, which demands that the Department of Defense investigate if U.S. allies in Yemen were torturing detainees. More about that later. But now it's got to be reconciled with the Senate version, which was passed in closed session. But Mike, my problem here is it's not about throwing more money at the military-industrial complex. The problem is squeezing the last reasonable dime from every defense dollar spent. And because this industry so intently lavishes campaign money on both sides of the aisle, executives keep believing that it is perfectly okay to deliver products so late to the field as to be obsolete, have huge cost overruns, or deliver products which don't work as advertised. And as a prime example of the last, I give you the Lockheed Martin F-35, which still has a host of problems the corporation cannot seem to get or to keep fixed.
And that's a good example of a long delay. That aircraft has been in development for 25 years. And that's a quarter of a century. They started developing that aircraft when I first set up my blog, when I married her. And of course, now it's outdated. We were talking the other day about how it doesn't have the range to go on real stealth missions because of the new long-range anti-ship missiles that are appearing on the other side. They have to move the carrier groups further out to sea. And the F-35 doesn't have the range to cross that space without aerial refueling, and aerial refueling tankers are not stealthy.
I'd also like to talk about the fact that the Pentagon is speeding up arms exports to Saudi Arabia and other allies. And they're speeding up and expediting weapons deliveries to countries like Saudi Arabia, Romania, Japan, and South Korea through a new pilot authority that changes how it can design and deliver contracts.
I wonder what's going on in Romania.
See, that, you just read my mind. When you have been with someone as long as Mike and I have been together, sometimes the same thought that hits your head hits their head too. And apparently they've got Patriot missiles for Romania, Global Hawks for Japan, THAAD for Saudi Arabia, and TOW missiles for multiple foreign military sales partner. And this was stated by Ellen Lord, who is the Defense Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment. And what this fast tracking will do is to shave years off the time it takes to deliver weapons to friendly militaries. Now, Mike, we know as well as grown people what Saudi Arabia is going to do with their weapons. They're going to continue to assassinate more Yemens and destroy more of the infrastructure. But I have to wonder about Romania, and I have to wonder about the timing. What is this getting ready for? What would your best guess be? Because you're very good at military strategy.
Well, if they're giving them Patriot missiles, then they're expecting, or maybe Romania just wanted them. Because, again, Patriot is an air defense system, not a particularly good one, but it's an air defense system.
Yep. Another very interesting article from Blacklisted News today. Technology turns the tables on global hegemons. Rand fears the future. And this is about a recent position paper published by the Rand Corporation, U.S. policy think tank, funded by and working for the largest military economic interests in the Western Hemisphere. And it fears how technology may further erode the West's technological and thus economic and military edge over a world it seeks hegemony over. And one of the things they focused on, which I thought was fascinating, 4 ways 3D printing may threaten security, which focuses specifically on computer-controlled manufacturing, and particularly 3D printing. And 3D printers already produce everything from prosthetic hands and engine parts to basketball shoes and fancy chocolates. But as with any technological advance, new possibilities come with new perils. And the 4 things that Rand is concerned about: hackers could use printers to cause real-world damage, enable new criminal and security threats, and that printed guns are not the biggest risk, and new manufacturing capabilities could endanger jobs.
Well, I'm glad they're finally taking a look at that, because this rush to automation at a time when we already have massive unemployment is an absolute path to disaster.
Yeah. People have to be able to earn, and people are able to earn, but the entire nature of work is transforming in front of our eyes right now.
True.
Yeah.
True,
yeah.
it is.
And
maybe the government is going to just simply pay us to keep watch on somebody else. We're going to be a nation of security guards.
Yes, minders of minders.
Yes.
Now I know. Yes.
We're having to take a break for commercials.
Okay.
And then we have a phone call waiting on the line.
Great.
So we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We were just looking at Fox News here, and of course, if it's Friday, there's another protest march in Gaza, and already the Israelis are just throwing tear gas, and no reports of shooting just yet, but again, an ugly situation. All right, we're going to take a phone call now from Mike in Chicago. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Mike, are you there? I'm not hearing Mike. Okay, Mike going once, going twice. All right, I guess he's not there. All right, so Claire, what's the next thing that you want to talk about?
The House has voted to mandate an investigation of U.S. involvement in Yemen's secret torture prisons. And this came in the wake of a bruising confirmation fight that highlighted new CIA Director Gina Haspel's role in the U.S. torture program in the years after 9/11. The House of Representatives on Thursday voted to force a public accounting of the U.S. role in torture prisons across the south of Yemen. Earlier this week, the House Rules Committee advanced an amendment by California Democratic Reps Rokana and Barbara Lee, and to both Democrats, well done. Thank you. I'm not that partisan that I can't appreciate when people are working for the public good, and I think in this instance, both representatives were. And this is going to require the Department of Defense to investigate whether U.S. allies in Yemen were involved in torturing detainees and if U.S. personnel had any role in those interrogations. The measure was adopted unanimously on the floor by a House vote on Thursday.
Voice vote.
Yeah, thank you. And what brought this up was an investigation by AP, which can, God bless their heads, still occasionally do their job, because last year they revealed a network of 18 clandestine prisons across South Yemen that are run by the United Arab Emirates, the U.S.'s primary ally in fighting al-Qaeda in Yemen, or by Yemeni forces controlled by the UAE. The investigation found that nearly 2,000 Yemenis had been disappeared into prisons where the article is describing this as severe torture techniques were the norm, including a grill in which the victim is tied to a spit like a roast and spun in a circle of fire. Folks, I am having a Jean-Luc Picard facepalm right now at warp speed. We're still using and outsourcing torture? That makes me so angry, Mike. I can't even begin to tell you how angry this is.
I did tell you they were doing worse things than waterboarding to those people.
Oh, I'm betting you. And you know, there is a gentleman of whom I've only relatively recently heard. And back in World War II, he was an interrogator for the Nazis by the name of Hans Scharf. Now, what made Hans Scharf so special was that he never, ever used torture on the English and British POWs he interrogated. But he treated them with kindness, like taking them out for day passes for cultural events and fed them decent food. And he was actually able to get actionable intelligence this way. And after the war was over, this guy was so respected by the American military that they invited him to give lectures on his technique of non-torturous interrogation because it worked.
Well, apparently the United States has lost those lecture notes.
Yeah.
Because they're back to the good old-fashioned method.
Yeah, and I find it, Mike, as a Christian pacifist activist, I'm very disheartened that the U.S. government didn't hire a Scharf archetype as the head of the CIA, but someone who ran torture sites in Thailand under her watch. And Gina Haspel has to be the second coming of a Torquemada archetype.
Well, see, what this program was all about,
Yeah.
And it was, of course, started under Bush and Cheney,
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's what these Democrats want to emphasize as the investigation brings on up.
Yeah.
But again, it was a campaign of terror to build fury against the United States so the war would go on.
Mm-hmm.
But most importantly, it was about gaining not the facts and not the truth, but politically expedient confessions, like getting Khalid Sheikh Mohammed to confess to being the mastermind of 9/11. And they only had to waterboard him 180 times to get that.
And torture his kids.
And torture his kids and make him witness it. But again, anything obtained under torture is unreliable.
Yep.
And it's amazing that the defenders of the Orthodox story of 9/11 to this very day say, oh, of course it was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. He confessed. They tortured him. Well, it doesn't really matter. He confessed. He's it.
No.
Yep.
He was a convenient bagman, a sacrificial lamb, if you would.
No, he was the prop to link 9/11 to Middle Eastern Arab nations to start off this century of unending war that was described by the Project for the American Century.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I found this article very interesting and very concerning. It comes to us from globalresearch.ca, which is a Canadian blog website, and they seem to have some very excellently written articles. And apparently the U.S. commander in Europe wants more troops and resources with which to target Russia. Now, this comes at a time, Mike, when Russia has substantially done a multi-year cut to their own military spending. But apparently that's not going to deter Pentagon brass, who intend to keep using it for more spending to counter them. And European Command Head General Curtis Scaparotti is the latest to push this narrative. General Scaparotti suggested that the modernization of Russia's military means that the U.S. needs to deploy even more troops in Europe with yet more equipment to deter Russia. Deter Russia from what? U.S. officials have been claiming that Russia was going to invade Eastern Europe at some point. Why would they?
Why would they? The place is a disaster.
Yeah, come on.
Europe's economy is on the edge of collapse. It's been trashed by the open borders.
Yeah.
Putin's got enough troubles running his own country. He doesn't need to add Europe's troubles, or for that matter, the United States. This is the same crud they were feeding us all the way back in the 1950s and 1960s about how the Soviet Union was coming to invade the United States, and they were going to force us to take placebos when we were sick and live under socialized medicine, blah, 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 blah. And of course, it never happened.
No.
And
it
was just a bunch of proxy wars fought over natural resources.
And apparently NATO officials have conceded that this has no relationship to reality. And it's even less realistic with Russia dialing back its military spending. But the costly deployments to Europe are politically popular for Eastern European NATO countries and a justification for the Pentagon to get even more money. While some of Scaparotti's comments are about getting more funding in general, he also suggested that counterterrorism forces from the Middle East be deployed to Europe. And it suggests that he is envisioning the U.S. withdrawing some of its forces from Iraq and Syria and wants to lead the pack in vying for those forces to do what with, Mike? I mean, come on.
More torture.
This is insane.
That's what the name of the torture program was, counterterrorism.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just insane. It's a concept that, again, has no relationship whatsoever with reality. And I don't think Russia is our enemy.
No.
He's not, Russia's not my enemy. If Putin or Lavrov knocked on our front door, I would sit down with them for tea. They both speak brilliant English and would be very interesting people to talk to.
They would be. I mean, anybody with common sense and open eyes understands who the real threat to world peace is right now. All you need to do is just take out a little sheet of paper and write down who has been invading who for the last going on 20 years.
Yeah. And there's a one.
U.S. invades Afghanistan.
Yeah.
U.S. invades Iraq. U.S. invades Libya. U.S. invades here. It's the United States is the aggressor. In this world war, we're the bad guys.
Yeah.
I know you don't want to hear that, but that's the truth.
Yes, it is, unfortunately. And I do encourage all of you, when you have a moment, to read the foreign press in English. Sometimes that's a very good way of getting a perspective on how people are thinking. I read Fars News every day in English. I also read Sputnik because I found some of their analyses to be very thoughtful and very, very realism and truth-centric. And one article that you're probably not going to see in the corporate news today, the watchdog for the U.S. stabilization program in Afghanistan is describing it as a $5 billion failure. U.S. set unrealistic expectations, 15-year program mostly failed.
All of these programs fail.
Yeah.
The U.S. government will lead an invasion into a country and then promise the American people, yes, we're making a mess of the place, but we're going to rebuild it. Yeah. We're going to rebuild it. They're going to have a really nice new country. It's called nation building. We're going to have a nice new country. And they'll spend a lot of money. The money goes into corruption, and nothing really gets done.
No.
I remember when they were trying to do the nation building down in Iraq, and they built that police station. And it started literally rotting and falling apart before it was even completed. It was built that cheaply. And I'm not, with things like that, with no real progress being made, it's probably why Muqtada al-Sadr won the election down there.
How ironic, and that's got to be one of the worst nightmares possible for the State Department and the DOD and Pentagon.
Yeah, how are they going to sell a third invasion of Iraq to the American people?
I don't think so. And Muqtada
They torture kittens.
Oh, no, please. No torturing of anything or anyone. Thank you. But this is just a monumental misuse of taxpayer funds. Now, I have been saying for a very long time that the most intelligent thing for the U.S. and NATO could do would be to safely withdraw our troops as quickly as possible and negotiate with whatever government is left standing in Kabul for the things that we went in there in the first place for, the pipelines, the rare earth minerals, and the opium, which unfortunately has come back to the streets of this country to maim and kill many of our young people, particularly in minority neighborhoods.
And it's not just a street drug anymore. It
yeah.
is this cheap supply of opium that has resulted in the pharmaceutical corporations cranking out these opiate medications like OxyContin
Yep.
and incentivizing doctors to overprescribe them to the point where seafood off the coast of Seattle is contaminated with it. Because you're taking the pills, you're going to the bathroom, the water processing treatment plant doesn't take it out.
Yep.
It flows out to the ocean. The sea life is getting high on this stuff.
Yeah, it's bad. And it was the charges over the pipelines when we were dealing with the Taliban.
Yes.
Where Bush threatened them war or money, and he said that the money that they were asking was too great. I wonder how he feels about the money that has been spent on the war since he inaugurated it here.
Wasn't his money.
Yeah.
Wasn't his money. He was just concerned about the money his friends in the oil companies, that oil company consortium.
Yeah.
And they said, we want a pipeline. This is what we're going to pay for it. And Afghanistan said, no, that's not the going rate.
Yeah.
We want the fair market rate for a pipeline right of way. And the U.S. said, no, it's just cheaper to invade you.
Wow. It's amazing the quality of thinking that comes out of D.C. And this is on a consistent basis. I would like to go over now and talk about our military. And this was in one of the military magazines describing what is happening. And in a very cheery opening sentence, it says, "Good news for U.S. Air Force retirees. The service has expanded plans to not only welcome back retired pilots into active duty staff positions, but also combat system officers and air battle managers."
Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah.
To help alleviate its manning shortage, the service is encouraging retirees from the 11X, 12X, and 13B Air Force Specialty Codes to apply for the Voluntary Retired Return to Active Duty program. It was announced Wednesday. And it said that it could take in as many as 1,000 former airmen, and goes on to state officers who return to active duty under VRRAD will fill rated staff and active flying staff, test, training, and operational positions where rated officer expertise is required, said the liaison, Major General Elizabeth Jarding of the Air Force's Personnel Center. Now, I have a translation of this for you. The Air Force is desperate for trained, experienced pilots and don't have enough coming through the ranks with a level of, it takes a lot of brights to be a pilot and nerves of steel. And
it takes a lot of time.
Yeah,
It's very expensive to train a combat pilot. Now, the Air Force Academy just had their graduating class. That's where Mattis came on out and said, you better get ready to prepare for war.
Yeah.
That was a graduating class of about 1,000, of which 400 are headed for flight training. But it takes years to get them up to speed. So I think this trying to get the retirees to come back is to basically fill a gap in pilot billets, as it were, as other people rotate home. I don't know what kind of response they're going to get from this.
No.
I'm pretty sure that those Air Force people retired for a reason.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to be in the Air Force any longer.
And Mike, if I'm wrong on this, tell me, but I really think the next step will be the reintroduction of the draft, because all forces are feeling the pinch, both in terms of the people they're having to accept, and this time they're going to be coming for our young women as well as our young men.
Well, there's going to have to be some kind of an event that galvanizes the nation, like the sinking of the Lusitania, which was a setup, or the attack on Pearl Harbor, which was another setup, where the people think, oh my goodness, we're being attacked, we must respond, and then they're ready to go along with that. In the current political climate, announcement of a draft could easily trigger rioting in the streets.
Yeah, I'm very nervous about this coming 4th of July. Happens right smack dab in the middle of the week, which means it would dominate the news cycle.
Yep.
If a false flag is being planned.
We could see something happen Monday on Memorial Day.
Yeah, I'm hoping and praying that it will not. But yes, you're absolutely right. We could. And everyone, we don't want to be fearmongers out here, but please do your due diligence, prepare, make sure you have things in your home that you will need, storable food, potable water, extra medications for yourself, your family, and your pets. And just, I'm not saying to people, hunker down, the sky is falling. Just be logically, rationally, and reasonably prepared. It's the best thing we can do.
Yeah.
Now,
we all know war is coming.
Yeah.
We all know it's coming. It's actually been ongoing. This is a slow motion world war. 18 years on now, 7 current wars that we know of. It really is a world war. They're trying to do it slow motion in the hope we won't notice. Well, we did notice.
Yep.
We noticed it in the cracked pavement of the streets. We noticed it in the corroded bridges. We noticed it in the retail vacancies. We noticed it in the decayed infrastructure and the wartime economy,
and
the homeless and the hungry.
Yeah, and the prices of food in our little...
We have to take a break.
Okay.
We'll be back with the last segment of our program today after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, final segment this Memorial Day weekend, Friday. And Claire, what is your last story?
This comes to us from Zero Hedge. Again, it's another blog I encourage you to read. I don't necessarily agree with everything Tyler Durden says or some of the other writers on the blog, but I found it generally to be a very reliable resource. And they're talking about Spygate, the 21st century Watergate and collusion against Trump, the biggest political scandal in U.S. history.
Oh, they have no idea.
Oh, yeah, the embedding of an FBI spy in the Trump campaign and the Obama administration's illegal wiretapping and unmasking of targets in the Trump camp revealed dangerous and unprecedented acts of collusion against what they are calling the most transformational president in our recent history. The liberal media mainstream are pushing against this reality, but the evidence is incontrovertible. And unfortunately, the real Obama is being shown for the blatant criminal he truly is.
Absolutely.
Spygate, the false allegation that the FBI had a spy in the Trump campaign explained, reads boxes, typically incurious and misleading headline. And there are other headlines in a similar vein blasting across the media's propaganda waves as they attempt to tamp down this bombshell. Well,
which is why you, our listeners and readers, have to grab all this stuff and just share it with everybody. Face-to-face conversations, email. Are you going to be talking with family and friends over the weekend? This is a great topic of conversation. Don't bother with social media. That's a complete waste of time right now. But this is the biggest scandal in U.S. history, not because of what we already know that has gone past Watergate, but because of what I suspect lurks underneath. Because when this breaks open and they get into the question of why this was being done, that's going to rip open all the way back to the Clinton Foundation and Hillary's email server and Imran Awan's spy operation inside the Capitol building. They are all connected.
And on Wednesday, President Trump asserted that Spygate will turn out to be one of the biggest political scandals in history. And I think, he's absolutely correct. The fact that FBI source and former Cambridge professor Stephen Halper had contact with at least 3 advisors during the Trump campaign to create a link between Russians and Donald Trump, which never existed.
And he's also been outed as having to come up with the Russian link that was used against Michael Flynn.
Yes.
He created that.
Yeah.
No wonder they paid him $1 million.
Yeah. Trump is taking on the massive, power-hungry, and unelected deep state cabal in Washington, and he should be very concerned because of it. The president has claimed he's caught in a major spy scandal, the likes of which may never have been seen before.
He's absolutely right about that, and I hope he's wearing his Kevlar undies.
Oh, you and me both.
Because these are very serious people, and it wouldn't be the first time they've killed off their own chief executive.
Yeah. And a former DOJ official stated in an interview on Fox that the FBI is illegally withholding investigation information. And what are they trying to hide? And...
oh, there's the music.
Okay.
We're at the end there. They're trying to hide everything. And yes, the FBI, Department of Justice, stonewalling. Okay, so it's Pauhana Friday. We're going to get on out of here and start our our Memorial Day weekend as much as we can. Stay tuned for John Stedmiller. He's going to have a lot of interesting things to share with you. Again, it is so important. Take all that you can about this Spygate that's going on. This is bigger than Watergate. Make this your topic of conversation at your Memorial Day festivities. We'll be back live on Monday. So have a good weekend. Have a safe weekend, and aloha, America.